Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Welcome to episode number 287 of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. I'm Marcy Larson, Andy's mom. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Robyn. Robyn is Drew's mom. It is always special when I get to talk to the mom of another Andrew, which has happened a few times on the podcast right now. And I do think it was very special circumstances that led Robyn to email me and reach out. So you'll have to listen all the way to the end because the end is pretty cool and special. Right now, though, just sit back and enjoy listening to Robyn, Drew's mom. Thank you so much, Robyn, for coming on the Always Andy's Mom podcast today.
Hey, thank you for having me here.
I am excited to speak to you today. So you are Drew's mom.
Yes.
But Drew was also Andrew, just like my Andy was also Andrew. So we have that in common. We just went with different nicknames for our boys. And I think it's really funny because both we were talking before we started recording about some funny stories about how the moment when Drew realized that his real name was Andrew and the moment that my Andy realized his first name was Andrew.
Yeah, it's a fun moment for them.
Yeah, it is a fun moment. Like, what? Really? What's funny is they did very different things with it because, yeah, you tell the story because it's a fun story of your Andrew, Drew.
My Andrew went by Drew exclusively up until about 4-year-old preschool. Then he came home one day and he's like, Mommy, my name is Andrew with a big A.
Right.
He was so excited about that. So then pretty much from there, he used Andrew or Drew or a combination of the two. Or
yeah, you're just interchangeable, right?
Exactly. Very interchangeable.
And I was telling you the story of my Andy about that very same age, and I had called him Andrew for some reason, and he looked at me and just gave me this very confused look and said, my name, not Andrew, it's Andy. And so it was the opposite. Like, that kid did not go by Andrew, hardly ever. So anyway, it's just fun. It's fun to kind of reminisce like that a little bit.
It is. And my grandson's name begins with an A as well. And he was like, I have a big letter A, just like Uncle Andrew.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to start out by just telling us all about your son, Andrew?
Well, my son, Andrew, he is the third of my 4 children.
Okay. Number 3. Drew's number 3. Okay.
He's number 3. So I have 2 girls and 2 boys. So the 2 girls are first. The 2 boys are at the end.
Okay.
So they're kind of like bookends.
Yeah.
My daughters like to refer to him as their big little brother.
Okay.
Because he is the big brother and also the little brother.
Uh-huh.
He has just this adventurous spirit. He pushed the boundaries on what he could do from the very beginning. He started walking when he was like 9-10 months old. And then he just didn't stop. He would just keep going. When he was 3, he wanted to learn how to ride a bike. So, we had the little tricycle and, with the little training wheels. And by the time he was in kindergarten, those training wheels had come off long before that. But he had this little tiny bike and he's like, I want a big bike. And so he got a big bike. And it's been a running joke that since then he's gone through at least like 2 or 3 bikes during each summer. I mean, it's just, he would just take those things and push them to the limit. He would build ramps and he would have the little half pipes and all this stuff that you do and jumping over things. I mean, one time I look outside and at the time we lived in a cul-de-sac.
Mm-hmm.
I look outside in the front and he's got his younger brother laying on the ground and he's going over him with his ramps.
I knew exactly where this was going as soon as you
Yep.
started. Like, oh no.
Yep. And I couldn't yell at him because I'm the one that bought him the ramps. So
Oh my goodness.
I didn't specifically say, hey, you can't jump over people.
Mhm.
So I learned then that I definitely needed to like
Be specific. Yes.
be very specific because he would pick out, well, you didn't tell me not to do that. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I didn't tell you not to jump over your brother. It's like, where is he? Oh, he's in the creek, and he just pushed whatever he could do, at when he was in second grade. He's like, can we walk to the library? And I'm like, no. I'm like, you have to cross a busy street.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to go by himself, and he wanted to take his bikes there. And then, when I actually did, when he was like in fourth or fifth grade, I'm like, okay, you can go to the library.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I've been doing that for a long time. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I thought you guys were at the park.
Yeah.
So he was, I had gotten respite care for a while, and the respite care worker at the time, this was pre-cell phone.
Mhm.
And the respite care worker was at the house, and I came back, and Andrew had broken his arm. He was standing on the back of the couch and got, pushed off and broke his arm. And this poor respite care worker was like, he was crying, but he was also laughing because he had fun doing it.
Oh my word.
I mean, we put the respite worker through the ringer. They had a swing set that was next to a treehouse. And one day I look and he's climbing on the top of the swing set to get to like where the slide is. And I'm like, how did you get up there? He's like, oh, from the treehouse. So I'm like, oh my. So it's like, I knew that he just had this love of adventure that as he got older was definitely going to be hard to, I don't know, contain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It got into, where, he would just be like, I'm like, what? I'll call him. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm running. I'm like, why? And he's like, just to run. And I'm like, oh, okay. Then I'm like, wow, you sound really out of breath. He's like, oh yeah, I'm riding my bike. I'm like, where are you? He's like, downtown. I'm like, you rode your bike downtown? And he lived right outside of Chicago.
Oh.
So he was riding from Chicago, but one of the neighborhoods to downtown Chicago. And I just used to fear the day that he got a driver's license.
Right.
But surprisingly enough, 16 came and went, and he still hadn't been driving. And I'm like, why aren't you getting your driver's license? Because he would take the train from his house to work, and he would take the train at the time. We lived in different areas. We were both ends of a train line. So he lived on one end, I lived on the other end. So he would just take the train out here. And I'm like, why? I'm like, I really thought that the day you turned 16, you'd be in the DMV, going, give me my license.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah. He goes, then I learned about insurance and car maintenance and everything else. He's like, I can wait a while.
So he wasn't living with you at the time?
No, his dad and we divorced when he turned 11.
Okay.
Both of us grew up in Chicago, but we had settled in a suburb outside of Chicago. And then when we divorced, his dad moved back to Chicago, and I moved out to Woodstock. So it's basically as north as you can go in Illinois until you hit the Wisconsin border. So
okay.
That actually was a hard thing for me because I was very lucky at the time that I was pregnant with Andrew that my ex-husband, his job was enough that I could stay home.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have to. And so I went from being a working mom to being a stay-at-home mom, and I just jumped into it. So I was like the Girl Scout leader, just everything. And in the summertime, it was like, what adventure are we going to go on now? We would hit all the museums and everything. So then it was hard, but we made the choice when we split. My one daughter was turning 18.
Mm-hmm.
So she came with me, and my other daughter was turning 14, and she was 14. She was going to be a freshman. So she decided she wanted to get a different group of kids to be with. So she moved with me, and my boys, they wanted to stay together, and they wanted to finish the school year that we were in the middle of.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed with their dad.
Uh-huh.
So that was hard because
Yeah, sure.
it was really hard, but in a way it actually kind of strengthened our relationship
Mm-hmm.
because then, there were more phone calls at night, and we got a little nighttime routine when he would call and say goodnight. And then it was, coming out on the train. So when they got old enough to take the train by themselves, and I moved out onto a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So there were animals, and there was a barn, and there was a silo, and I pulled into the driveway one day, and Andrew was on the side of my silo, just climbing the silo.
Oh my
You
goodness.
know, so it gave him other things to do. Like, we were on 10 acres of land at the time. So he was able to like build these huge bonfires, drive all kinds of machinery. There was, tractors. There was like modern tractors, and then there was antique tractors.
Uh-huh.
They set up an archery range, and so they just had such a different kind of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say that's quite a different experience because they were in the city more with their dad, huh?
Yeah.
And then true country life with you,
Yeah, exactly.
with animals and barn and tractor and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so you go the city mouse, country mouse, they did it both, and it was just a really fun time. His dad and I were able to work it out so that if there was, something going on at their school, I was there. I still managed to volunteer at the book fairs. I still
Mm-hmm.
He did something called Rockets for Schools, and I was taking the train down there twice a week to just for an hour and a half to go and help him and this group build these rockets, and then I'd be taking the train back. So
Yeah.
it definitely, at the time, I was really, really upset about it, but it ended up making us closer in a different way. And, then he started working. He got a job when he was 14, just, doing odds and ends. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was a little bit, so there wasn't as much time. And then by the time, then at 15, he got another job. By the time he got to 16, the weekends weren't there anymore, but that had happened with all the kids, essentially.
Yeah.
My current husband has 2 children. So yeah, it just, we saw less and less of him. That led to a lot of surprise visits,
Yeah.
where he called me and he's like, "What are you doing today?" And I'm like, "Oh, nothing. I'm off work today." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So then the doorbell rang, and like instantly, and I'm like, "Did you call me from the driveway?" And he's like, "Yeah." So
Well, I do love that it made everything, all those moments more precious. Don't you think?
it really did. It really did, because I know that wouldn't have happened if we were if we had been living together, and it was, yeah, it was just special because, he would just pop by, and then eventually he moved out to our area.
Okay.
He moved in. His sister's boyfriend at the time was getting deployed, so he moved, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but
Yeah, it's okay.
he joined the National Guard and was in the same unit with my daughter's boyfriend. And Andrew ended up staying back because, surprisingly enough, he broke his arm. So he wasn't able,
Said sarcastically because he was always doing stuff like that.
he was always doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he wasn't able to go. He stayed with her because, she was in a house and she'd be alone, and he wanted to make sure that, that she was okay. So
Feeling comfortable and yeah.
yeah, so he stayed. It was about 15 minutes from us. So, then there was, a lot more of that.
And that's after he was done with high school and all that stuff anyway, I'm sure, right? If he was in the National Guard then, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it was a couple weeks after he graduated. He's like, every time he called, I would see his name pop up, and I'm like, okay, what is it going to be this time? He's like, and he always started with, "So what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm at work." I'm like, "I'm driving." At the time, I was doing case management, and I go do home visits with different seniors. And I'm like, "I'm just driving from one person to the other." He's like, "Oh." He's like, "Ask me what I'm doing." I'm like, "Oh boy." I'm like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Joining the Army." And I'm like, when? And he's like, now. I'm getting sworn in about half an hour. And I'm like, we had known that he was going to eventually do it. We did not know that he was going to do it then.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, can you have somebody send me a picture? I'm like, something. But that was like always just something that we could expect him to be doing, just it. We just never knew what was going to be next for him.
Oh, so we joined the army.
So he joined the army. He joined the National Guard. He joined in the infantry unit, which it totally tracks. His older sister and his younger brother also ended up joining the National Guard. Angie went, then my daughter, then my younger son. One right after the other. One would come home, the next one would leave. Andrew was the only one that joined infantry, and he knew full well when he joined this unit where he would end up, and he also knew that they were scheduled to be deployed. So he joined with the intention of knowing that less than a year later he would be deployed to Afghanistan, of all places.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
So he did it.
But then he didn't because he broke his arm.
He did it because he broke his arm.
Right.
Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah. But that was him. He just had this life of adventure. If he wanted to do something, he did it.
Yeah.
And like one day he called me up and he's like, guess what I'm doing? And I'm like, again, Andrew, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm on my way to Florida. And this was for New Year's Eve, or right around New Year's. I'm like, what for? He's like, I want to see the sun come up over the ocean on New Year's Day. He's like, I just want to sit on the beach and see that. And I'm like, wow, that sounds really awesome. I'm like, how are you getting there? He's like, oh, they borrowed somebody's parents' work van, a cargo van, and they set up some lawn chairs and a hammock inside the van and drove to Florida like that. And I think from us up here, it's like 16 hour drive.
Yeah. Yeah. We just did that. We just did that from Michigan. It's 19. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So
about that. Oh, my.
He just drove straight on through it.
Yeah.
So he sent me a video from wherever he was on the ocean, and he's like, look at it. He's like, I did it. He's like, I see the sun is coming up over the ocean and it's New Year's. He's like, this is just amazing. I'm like, yeah, but he just did stuff like that. And, and I never questioned it, because it's Andrew.
Yeah. That's just the way he was.
That's just how he was. And, he would, once he started driving, he would show up in my driveway with like parts of his car just gone. And this one time he showed up, he did one of those, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. I'm like, you don't live anywhere near my neighborhood. He's like, yeah, but I'm in your neighborhood. Can I borrow your driveway for a couple minutes? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm like, come on by. He rang the bell because he needed to use my Dremel and my electricity and my all my tools and stuff. And I'm like, where's the bumper to your car? And like the bumper, he had this little Ford Focus, the racing one, the ST. And like the bumper is like the whole front of your car.
Right.
I'm like, where's your bumper? He's like, in the back seat. I'm like, why is it not in your car? He's like, oh, well, there's a story where like I was driving and I kind of hit like the median and it kind of flew off. And now I'm here to put it back on. Just.
Oh, my.
To say that I had a lot of anxiety would be an understatement. I worried every single day, but not in a bad way. I was just, because it's like I knew things were going to be coming. And it's like one day he shows up and he's like, so how would you feel if I got a motorcycle? And I'm like, so tell me about this motorcycle that you want. He's like, oh, it's a little one, blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me this stuff. So I looked at him. And he was standing in my kitchen. I looked at him. I go, it doesn't matter if I say that I want you to have a motorcycle or not. I'm like, because I bet you any amount of dollars right now that motorcycle is sitting in your garage by your dad's. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Yeah. I'm like, I don't like the motorcycle. All I ask is that you wear your helmet all the time. And he's like, I might be an adventurous and a daredevil, but I'm not stupid. And I'm like, yeah. And then that motorcycle turned into another motorcycle that went faster. But he still always wore his helmet. I mean, when he was at basic training, he had his motorcycles in our garage.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived we had moved off the farm a few years prior. So we lived in a subdivision, and we were a couple blocks away from the main street, and then there was a church. And he was having some friends come by and because he had to pick up his car and his motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a bunch of friends come over and take his motorcycle on a trailer so he could bring it back. And he walked that motorcycle from our house to the church because he didn't have a helmet. And he told me that he wouldn't drive without a helmet. So he also, yeah, he just was that guy that if it's 3:00 in the morning and your car broke down and it was the middle of winter in a snowstorm, he'd be there. He's like, yeah, I'm coming. He was that guy. He was, you could count on him for just about anything.
Well, do you want to talk now about what happened to Drew?
There's a little bit of a story.
Mm-hmm.
So basically he passed in a motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
He was riding, and a lady turned left into her apartment complex's driveway and didn't see him. Yeah. And so the hard part to accept is that it wasn't the lady's fault.
Mm-hmm.
The area that he was riding around in was an area that I had lived in when I had been in high school. So it was kind of funny that that had brought him back there.
Yeah.
And he was at a stoplight, and I would say his accident happened about a quarter mile from the stoplight. And from the time that the light turned green, what the police officer told us was that he had hit his high speed of 106 miles an hour.
Oh.
And when impact occurred, they estimated it to be 60 miles an hour. So she probably did see that the light was red and that the light had turned green, but there was no way for her to judge exactly how fast he was going. It was pretty much the light turned green and he was on her.
Right.
So he was wearing his helmet.
Yeah.
Which we were thankful for. But prior to that, I think a little bit in what I sent you is I'm kind of a believer in signs.
Mm-hmm.
Right before it was weird. Just a couple less than 6 months. Well, 6 weeks before his accident, he had turned 20.
Okay.
And his big thing is he wanted to have a party with me and everything for his 21st birthday. Well, he wanted to celebrate
Mm-hmm.
by having a shot with me. And I'm like, Andrew, I cannot condone you I'm not going to go drink with you before you turn 21. I'm like, I promise you, when you turn 21, I'll do a shot with you. Because that was his big thing. So he turned 20 and he's like, come on, Mom, let's go do a shot. I'm like, I'm like, I told you next year. That's the thing. And he just kind of, he's like, all right. I know. But it was the beginning of COVID because his accident was in 2020. So in March, COVID had just started happening.
Sure.
And so things were beginning to shut down and whatnot and get very weird. I had just started a new job.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in February. I just started a new job and I was there for my second day and he sends me a picture and I didn't know what I was looking at. And it turns out what I was looking at was his car after it had hit a tree. And I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. He busted out every window in his car with the exception of his windshield.
Really?
And he got up and walked away.
Yeah.
The story he tells me is that he was going down this hill and he hit a patch of ice and he spun out.
Uh-huh.
Whether that's really what happened, I don't know.
Right.
And he called his sister, got a ride and whatnot. And this was February and his car was just totaled. So then, because he didn't have another car, they were, waiting for everything to happen. He started driving or started riding. We called it the little motorcycle because it was the smaller one in comparison to the bigger one that he had just gotten. So he was driving this little motorcycle. He drove this little motorcycle. He was hanging out with a bunch of friends. And the story I got was that they were in a parking lot playing soccer
Mm-hmm.
with their motorcycles, with a beach ball is what I got. And he drove off of the loading dock. Like, he didn't see it and he just drove off and just fell however many feet it was and destroyed his bike. The people that he was with were concerned that he was severely injured, and he got up, joked, and said, "All right, who's going to drive me back?" Um,
Wow.
and there was, and he just got up. He did hurt his foot.
Uh-huh.
He was in a boot after that.
So you had really kind of two near-death experiences right before.
They're
Yeah, almost. You know what I mean? Accidents that could have killed him, I should say.
right. Exactly. Accidents that could have killed him. And then after that, his brother and Andrew are 16 months apart, and they
Mm-hmm.
were best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Just somewhere along the line, my younger son moved. I think it was like when he was in 7th grade. He moved. So he was about 30. So about 2 years after the divorce, 3 years after the divorce, he moved out by me.
Mm-hmm.
So the boys were split up, but they still saw each other every weekend because we just flip-flopped.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're both out of school and stuff. So my younger son, when he got his bonus from the Army, they went out and they bought a Miata. And what they were going to do is work on this Miata and rebuild it together.
Mm-hmm.
They were working on it one day in my daughter's garage, and somehow or another they rolled. It was up on the ramps. It started to roll down when Andrew was under it. The next thing I know, I just hear that Andrew had gloves on and he was afraid to take his glove off because he was afraid his fingers were going to come with it. So my other son takes him to the emergency room.
Uh-huh.
Andrew had stitches on his fingers, so he saved all his fingers. And he remembered that he was allergic to penicillin, which was a good thing.
Uh-huh.
The next day, he tells me what it is. I get the pictures and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, you're good. He's like, yeah, I'm good. He sends me this picture of him and he's like, I don't know if this is good or not. And I look and he sends me this picture and he's covered. He just sent me from the waist up. He's just covered in a rash. And I'm like, you're sure they didn't give you penicillin? He's like, yeah. He's like, they didn't. They gave me something else. And I'm like, you need to go to the ER now. And he's like, no, I'll wait. I'm like, no, seriously. I'm like, you're having a severe reaction. He's like, it'll go away. It went away.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
My poor mama heart was like,
Poor mama's heart.
yeah. I'm like, Drew. I'm like, man. I'm like, you're guilt.
It's so funny because you're relaying this conversation and he's like having a conversation and talking to you, and I'm thinking to myself, he didn't need to go to the ER.
Oh,
so
he
he was right. He was right.
Yeah.
This is now Dr. Larson agreeing with him. Like, if he's talking to you and whatnot, and he will be all right. So that was good. But still, like, a lot of scary stuff happening. All one after another after another after another.
One after another after another. And my mama's heart was just, yeah. So my daughter's lease was up, so he was helping her move.
Uh-huh.
And this is right around the endish of April, and his accident was on May 3rd.
Uh-huh.
So this is like just a week or two, and he was helping her move, and he didn't have a car because
Right.
he didn't get his car back.
Sure.
So I was over there helping him and stuff like that, and we were moving some of her stuff into our garage. And on one of the trips that we were driving back to her house, all these near misses in the last couple weeks.
Yeah.
And we had a very open relationship. We were just, we would joke around with each other. There definitely was a level of respect there, but my family definitely does like the whole sarcastic comedy thing and everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I just be like, I'm like, Drew, I'm like, seriously, I'm like, you are not a cat. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you don't have 9 lives. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm like, you almost took yourself out of this world.
Yeah.
You know,
With a car accident, then the
the
motorcycle
car accident, the
accident,
motor
then
accident, Matt's car falling on you. I'm like, all this stuff. I'm like, do me a favor. And because he was in the army, that's why I said it. I'm like, Drew, I'm like, I don't want to be a Gold Star mom.
yeah.
I just don't. I'm like, I want to be many things in this life, but I don't want to be that. I'm like, just watch yourself.
Yeah.
So he made some jokes about stuff. And I mean, he already hadn't gone. Well, he got the broken arm because he wiped out on his motorcycle before he
Mm-hmm.
got chipped. Um, and I'm like, come on. I'm like, and he goes, no, no, no. He's like, I'm good. I'm good. And so we kind of let that go. And then we were joking a little bit because he had gotten a new girlfriend. And he was telling me how he's going to go meet his girlfriend for dinner or meet his girlfriend's parents that night for dinner. And I'm like, what the heck, man? I'm like, you got this girlfriend and her parents are meeting her. You're meeting her parents. I'm like, and I didn't even know you had a girlfriend. So he was joking and he's like, just wait. And then, he's telling me her name and
Yeah.
he's getting all sweet in this. And so we were talking about her and everything. And then he just looked at me. He's like, Mom, he goes, when I die. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that's if. He's like, no. He's like, Mom, when I die, he's like, I want you to take my life insurance and buy yourself a new car. He's like, the car that I had, it had hit 200,000 miles and it just, he's like, you deserve a new car. He's like, I want you to have a new car. And I'm like, Andrew, I'm like, we're not even going to talk about this. He's like, no, Mom. He's like, when it happens. And I'm like, all right, we're just stopping this conversation. I'm like, let's talk more about your girlfriend. Let's talk more about whatever. And then a couple days later, I went there just to grab some of his stuff that was out of the garage because I was on my way to a friend's house because at the time, like 15, 20 years from now, this isn't going to make sense. But her daughter was making the headbands for the masks with the buttons
Oh, okay.
so that the healthcare workers, like I said, it's not going to be, it's a COVID thing.
Yeah.
She was looking for buttons and I had a whole bunch of buttons. So he's like, I have this bunch of stuff to pick up. I'm like, oh, I'll pick it up tomorrow. And my husband at the time, he's like, why don't we just stop there and pick it up on the way? Cause we're going to pass through that area dropping off these buttons. And so we did.
Mm-hmm.
And Angie wasn't a big hugger. I'm not a big hugger. So he loaded some stuff up in my back seat, whatever. As I was getting into the car, he's like, wait, come here. And he gives me this huge hug. Now, the last time that I had a hug, that he gave me a hug like that was after his family day when he was at basic training and we had to leave
Mm-hmm.
for another 9 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what was that for? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. And that was the last time I saw him.
Wow.
It wasn't the last time I talked to him because I had talked to him. He texted me every night. But that was the last time I saw him. And, it's like, what, that's like the only what if I get. It was like, what if I hadn't dropped those off,
Yeah.
It's kind of just like, I don't know if he knew, but I think, I think something because we didn't have conversations like that.
Mm-hmm.
We would joke around and I played that conversation over and over in my mind. And he was like, yeah, he's like, when I die, he's like, buy yourself. I mean, I wanted an Explorer and, he's like, buy yourself a new Explorer. He's like,
Hmm.
just, and I'm like, I don't want car payments and stuff like that. He's like, oh no. He's like, just get it. And yeah. And I told him, no, I'd rather have you than the car.
Did you? Out of curiosity?
I did buy an Explorer.
Yeah.
I didn't buy a brand new one.
No.
I bought a used one in the style that I wanted. And it was funny because his favorite color was cobalt blue.
Uh-huh.
But his car was black. And he knew that I really liked black cars, right? I just decided one day my younger son he garaged his Miata and then he needed another car. So he went out and he bought himself a car. He bought a Ford Focus ST just like Andrew had. His is white. And I was taking him to pick up his car. And as we're driving, it's summertime. My air conditioning went out. It had crank windows and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we're driving and, it is hot.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he's like, Mom, he's like, why don't you buy yourself a car? I'm like, I can still get a few. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, buy yourself a car. He's like, Andrew wanted you to get a new car. He's like, he even told you he wanted you to get a new car. So then like the next day, I'm like, all right, let's go out looking for cars. So we go and we were just looking and I found one at a dealership not too far from me. They had a blue one and they had a black one. And the black one, fewer miles, and it was black. The blue one had the features that I wanted, had a few more miles, but it was blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't want blue, I want black. I ended up going with the blue one. And Matt was with me when I picked it up. As I'm driving home, I go, I wonder if Angie would like this car. I'm like, I wonder if he would be mad that I didn't get the other one or if he would like this one. And as I said that, there's that little clip on the vent that you use to move up and down to change that. That thing flew across the car. It just shot off of there and it flew across the car. And I'm like, well, I guess he likes it.
You know why I asked you if you got the car? Because after Andy died, obviously our car was totaled. That was my car that I drove. It was it was a minivan, a Honda Odyssey, and I had to get a different car, and I wasn't in any mood to be getting a different car. And there was no way on God's green earth that I was ever going to drive a minivan again after that. I couldn't even stand looking at a minivan. And so my best friend Kara had a black Ford Explorer. And I said, do you like your car? And she said, yeah, I do. And I said, do you mind if I buy one just like it? And she said, no. And so I bought a black Ford Explorer because I just didn't. And I still drive that car. And in some ways, I wish I didn't because it just has kind of not great memories in some ways because it was just like I had to do something because I was, we went several weeks and I had nothing to drive and I needed to drive something. So it was just such an odd way of doing it. But then when you said a Ford Explorer, I thought, I wonder if she got it because that's what I got after my Andy died. So
I got it and I'm still driving it. And I'm like, yeah, Drew, I'm like, I got, I got it. You wanted me to get it. I got it.
Yeah.
So then I'll joke with them like, you didn't have to do what you did for me to get a new car. You could have just been like, you really need a new car, Mom.
Right. I'm putting my foot down. You need a new car. So do you want to talk a little bit about your grief journey? Because we've not really started to talk about that yet.
My grief journey. Like I said, I'm in the mental health and disabilities advocacy field.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't think we talked about that since we started recording, but yeah, you did mental health advocacy, then you did more disability, now back a little more mental health. But yeah, that's kind of your background.
That's my background. I've been in the field for 20 years. So when he passed, I went from mom mode into work mode.
Yeah.
So I made thankfully because he was in the military, and he was going to be deployed, his preferences as to what he wanted his service to look like were already listed out for us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we didn't have to worry about that. So I just went into work mode. I did what I had to do. I kept myself busy. I was checking in with everybody else to make sure everybody else was okay. And I just went.
Yeah.
The Sunday after he passed was Mother's Day. So I braced myself. I'm like, all right, this is what you need to be prepared for. This is what you need to do. I found organizations. I jumped into the grief journey. I'm like, all right, we're going to get counseling. I mean, I was in therapy for this within a month of his passing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just jumped full in and I did things. So his motto was he wanted to die with memories and not live with dreams.
Okay. Oh.
I took that and in the height of COVID, I bought 3 kayaks because I wanted to kayak and I'm going to kayak. I bought a bike because I'm going to go and buy a bike. And I just did all these things. And, I lost 50 pounds and I just jumped into this. I'm like, I am doing so good. And my therapist is like, you are not doing good.
Yeah.
She's like, have you cried? I'm like, I have not cried. Or I'm like, I have cried, but I'm like, but not recently. And she's like, you need to lean into your grief and you need to let yourself feel your grief. And you need to, she's like, you need to actually grieve. She's like,
You need to feel it. Yeah.
yeah, I need to feel it. I'm like, nope, not going to happen. I'm like, I'm good. I got this. My job at the time, we were working remotely.
Uh-huh.
So, and all we had to do was check in. So I had all this free time. So that's what I was doing. I was traveling wherever we could travel, taking road trips to find different things and totally ignoring the
Yeah.
fact that my life was falling apart. My kids were falling apart. My relationship was falling apart. But hey, I'm doing good, right? Because I can get up every morning and I can I can go and in I was doing a grief program and we're meeting every week and they're like, wow, you're doing so well. I'm like, yeah, look at me. I'm doing so well. But that what my therapist has said, the lean into your grief just stuck in the
Mm-hmm.
back of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And we got through setting up his memorial and I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. I used a ton of dark humor as my coping skill.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm like, I'm fine. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm like, I'm good. And got through got through Halloween, which was one of his favorite holidays, got through Thanksgiving, got through Christmas. And I'm
Yeah.
like, we did what it said in the books. We set up new traditions, we kept old traditions, we just let ourselves feel how we felt. And then New Year's hit.
Yeah.
And all the programs I was in didn't prepare me for New Year's. In the
Yeah.
grief books and stuff, they always focus on Christmas and
I
Thanksgiving. And
know.
it's like
I think New Year's is worse.
New Year's, yeah, it New Year's took me out
Yep.
because
Me too.
it, yeah, I'm like, this is a year that I'm going into a year that he's never going to know. He
Yeah.
knew 2020. He did
Yeah.
not know 2021. And that was where things started to fall apart for me.
Uh-huh.
I started struggling at work and we had gone back to the office. My work performance started to be noticeable that it
Yeah.
wasn't up to where it should be. I stopped going to a lot of the grief programs. I still was doing I still was following my eating program, but there was just a lot that I was missing. I realized that my therapist was helping me, but I wasn't sure what kind of help I was needing. So I was just kind of stumbling around for quite a
Yeah.
while,
Mm-hmm.
a long while. My my marriage, because it was his stepson and stuff. He loved Andrew, but my marriage wasn't making it. Um, and at the end of 2021, the lease on the house that we were renting expired.
Mm-hmm.
It was over. He wasn't going to renew it, and my husband and I went separate ways. I moved in with my younger son, and he moved into his own place. We're still, even at this point in time,
Mm-hmm.
working in our relationship, and I think that's when the healing finally started for me. That's when I really leaned into the grief. I started looking at what a traumatic experience this was and
Mm-hmm.
being okay to say, "Hey, I'm not okay with this." I'm not okay. And I would say, "I can't do this for you right now because I'm grieving."
Yeah.
And then cuz I am a helper by nature, I started to use some of the stuff that I knew professionally into kind of helping other people. I would put together grief reading lists and pass it out and help other people connect to resources they might be needing that they didn't realize that they were needing,
Mm-hmm.
based on, and telling everybody, hey, your grief journey is your own.
Yeah.
You don't know what that looks like until you're actually in it. I tried to help my kids, but realized that their grief journey wasn't mine
Mm-hmm.
and that the things that was working for me may or may not work for them.
Yeah.
So I kind of backed away from them and I'm like, guys, I said, I'm not leaving you, I'm not hanging you out to dry. I'm like, but you let me know, when you're ready. And then each of them, have done things their own way. And, together we're kind of healing. We celebrate Andrew every birthday. They talk to him just as he's still here. And they're very open when they're angry with him. And at first they were scared to say that they were angry with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, I'm angry with him too.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't get to see little Andrews running around. The whole thing that I used to say to him, like, wait till you have a baby just like you. I'm like, I don't get that. I don't get the mother-son dance with him. We met his girlfriend, and I have so much respect for her.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know anybody in our family, and she came to his service, and she walked up to me and she's like, hi, I'm Andrew's girlfriend. And I'm mad because I don't get to see that relationship you
Right.
know blossom. We do stay in touch with her, and she is just an amazing person, with an amazing family. And I think, if Andrew had to pick anybody, she's
Mm-hmm.
she's just a fantastic person. So it's just been a lot of trial and error for me as to what works, what doesn't work. And now I'm in a place where, hey, Drew, I'm mad at you.
Yeah.
How could you do this to me? But then it's like he was living his life. He didn't know he was gonna die. In fact, the reason he was where he was is because it was Polish Independence Day,
Mm-hmm.
and an acquaintance of his had a fatal motorcycle accident about 2 hours before his, just about a mile over. And news had gotten around that had happened, and him and his group collectively, he was like one of, like, I think 3 people on bikes, and then there's a few cars. They had decided that they were going to park their bikes and just get into cars because that really shook those guys up.
Yeah.
So
So that just happened a few hours before?
just a few hours before, and it made it back to them, and they're like, yeah, we're just gonna hang it up and come back in. And then, so yeah, it's, and I learned by quite a few therapists. I learned how, because I didn't see the accident scene. There are pictures of it. He had his GoPro on, so there is video of his whole accident. Nobody has watched that except the police. We have it, but nobody's watched it. But my kids had seen pictures of the accident scene and other things, and I never have. I wanted to see them because I was convinced that the pictures that my brain was making up couldn't be any worse than the actual things. And my kids will not let me see them. And for a while I was mad at that, but I'm actually not, because now at this point I don't think I could handle seeing them.
Yeah, we have our accident report is in a file in the office, and I've never looked at it. And Eric's never looked at it. We got that from our attorney. He got the whole huge police report. It's a really thick police report, and it has a lot of pictures in it and a lot. And he went through the whole thing, and he said, "I would not advise you to look at this,
Yeah,
but I'm going to give it to you so that you can have it. But I would not advise you to look at it." So we never have.
that's exactly what the police officer told us. We went there to get some of his belongings that they picked up at the scene. They said that, because we asked where the GoPro was, and they said it was still in evidence. They were trying to recreate it, and that when it was ready, they would call us. So they called us a couple months later, and we went to go pick it up. And the officer asked us if we had any questions. And my question is, what was his last word?
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure I knew what it was. I'm thankful that the officer didn't tell me what I thought it was. um, he just said that at the light he was talking to his friends and joking about his friends' cars. He also did say, and this is where my faith has gotten me through a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was not an overly religious person, but the officer said they have audio and video up into about a split second before the impact of the accident, and then everything just cut out and it went to snow. And then the audio came back. He goes, but we didn't catch the actual impact. He goes, in my experience, he's like, that's very unusual. Usually you get the impact and then the camera goes out, not before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's where my faith just came in and my beliefs, but that's kind of got me through it as well. And the officer, when he was giving us the camera, he goes, I am a parent. He goes, as a parent, I'm telling you, don't ever watch this.
Yeah.
He's like, you don't ever want to. And I've never looked at the autopsy photos.
No, me either.
I read the police report and I read the autopsy report because in my early grief, I thought hearing things very scientifically would help.
Yeah.
And it didn't. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
I wish I could unread it.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
So.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's why I've never, like, sometimes I think maybe I should go read it. Maybe I should. And then, but like, that's what you said is you can't undo it then. It's just then done and it's out there. And so it's probably better to just not.
Right.
Even though the unknown is difficult too, but.
I guess where I got comfort from that is I know it's there if I ever.
Yes.
If I ever want to, but I won't. Reading it was just, if I could go back and tell my early grieving self, don't do it. Just stick it in the Andrew box. You don't need to read it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would, but I was so, I don't know, like emboldened right then. Like I got this. I can handle this grief, and so I did. And me now, almost 5 years out, is definitely like, I should not have done that. I don't advise that. I will not be doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, and I know when you wrote to me, you said you were wondering about podcast yourself and things like that, right?
Yeah, it was one of the things that I had been thinking about, because I'm like, my roles have always been like providing resources and stuff. I got in trouble from a lot of jobs because I would do that when it's not part of my job. I'm like, how do you just not do it? And I'm like, I have this information. I don't have an outlet for it. As COVID happened, and then I was out on medical leave for a while, and then I'm like, wow, there's social media.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. And our social media person is the reason I would be doing this. Andrew was our social media guy. How do you do this, Drew? I'm like, I want to start a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and I just, I did like what I do with everything else. I bought all the stuff.
Okay.
I bought the stuff. I did, and again, that was like, early 2020 when I bought all this stuff. And then I'm just sit there looking at the box because it's still in the box. I never unboxed it. I got all the things, right? And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I'm like, how do you do a podcast? And then I'm like, no. I'm like, I absolutely hate my voice on recordings. So I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And then I'm like, who's going to want to listen to me? So it was just this whole thing. And 5 years later, it never came up. And I'm like, this is such a great platform to do that. And like, I'll go to these grief groups, and I'm sitting there and they're talking like, you should go and do something. You should have a podcast. And I'm like, I know, but I eventually went and started seeing a different therapist. And just last week, he goes, Robyn, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing. I'm like, I need an outlet of something. I'm like, crafting isn't cutting it. And he's like, what about a podcast? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I don't know how podcasting works. He's like, well, how are you going to figure it out if you never start? And I'm like, he's like, you need to take it out of the box first. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm like, we're not going to focus on that right now. And he goes, what about a book? And I'm like, a book? He's like, yeah, write a book. I'm like, who's going to read what I have to say? He's like, write a book. He's like, self-publish it. He's like, and if nobody reads it, nobody reads it.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways it doesn't matter, right? You're just doing it for your own grief and your own healing and something you can kind of do with your Drew, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now I have this therapist. He's a younger guy. He has kind of the same approach to therapy that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So every week when I go in there, he's like, I am holding you accountable to you saying that you want to be out there helping people and stuff like this. He's like, so every week, he's like, we're going to focus on this. Cause it's like to the point in therapy where the triggering holidays come up and stuff like that I need to focus on Drew. But it's more so finding out who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Again, how I am now as a grieving mom and still being a mom and all that. And he goes, so I'm just going to hold you accountable. He's like, and we're just going to do this. And you're not going to back out because I'm holding you accountable. And I'm like, oh, great. Thanks. I'm like,
well, you said that you were in one of your groups and then you found out about my podcast. I'm like, okay, I guess maybe I could just be on that one for now, right?
Yeah, that was exactly it. Because I was in the Compassionate Friends in that group. And one of the ladies there she had gone to the convention or something, and she received your resource, and she had been talking about your podcast and everything, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then she hands out the sheet, and I'm reading the sheet. I'm like, oh, I'm like, look, Andy's mom. I'm like, Andy, Andrew. I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. At the bottom, it says, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, so I told my therapist the next week, and he's like, you contacted her, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, awesome. He's like, grab your phone. I'm like, what for? He's like, because we're contacting her right now. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that right now. I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't. And I'm like, I need to know how to craft. He's like, okay, fine. He's like, next week you're going to come back and you're going to have contacted her. He's like, because you need to see how it's done. He's like, so, and I'm like, okay, I'll do it. So then I came back and I told him, he's like, when is it? And I'm like, we're recording it in a couple weeks. I'm like, and then it's going to be a few weeks after that. So,
well, I think it was probably months, right? I mean, I think I scheduled this.
It was.
I know I scheduled this over 2 months ago because I'm scheduling out a long way. So I'm sure he's like, oh, 2 months, great. And then another month and a half before it comes out. But still, it's, we're making progress. But I didn't realize I was such a part of your therapy until right now.
It really was because, like I said, I'm a big thing about signs. And sometimes, I recognize the easy signs, especially like, oh, there's a feather on my car that wasn't there before, really fun. Okay. I'm like, oh, thanks, Drew, stuff like that. But then there are like the more subtle signs, like when something just feels right. And I'm sitting there going, okay, this says Andy's mom and it's a podcast and she's and I'm like, okay, I'm like, if this isn't something that I need either for healing or something, I'm like, then, but like sometimes I'm just kind of dense and need to be whacked over the head. Like, hey, this is a sign. So that's, and it's like, I didn't tell anybody other than my therapist that I was doing it.
Okay.
Because, I'm like, this is my healing. And when it comes out, I'll let everybody know. Because I've been telling people about your page, and because one of my grief groups has disbanded, and it left some of the parents without another resource. So I'm like, you got to check this out.
Well, good.
I'm like, there's something for everybody on there.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I so appreciate getting to hear about Drew and your story. And I really appreciate being a little part of your therapy. And now you get to go back next week or whatever and say, hey, I did it. I was on.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, exactly. Actually, I have therapy a little bit after this.
Oh, good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, tell your therapist hello and thank you.
Yeah, and I'm like, yep, and he's gonna say, I'm like, I just recorded it earlier today. So
oh, well, thank you again so much for being on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful and would like to support the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and comment. To help financially, you can type Andy's Mom, one word, to the number 53555. This provides a link to GiveButter, which allows donations through PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, or credit cards. GiveButter will provide a receipt of your tax-deductible donation. Or you can visit the donation page at andysmom.com/donate. Always Andy's Mom is a registered 501c3 and can receive donations through Thrivent Financial and Benevity. Marcy loves hearing from listeners. Please feel free to reach out to her via email at marcy@andysmom.com or on the Instagram or Facebook Always Andy's Mom accounts. Sign up for the email list to get weekly episode links as well as pictures of Marcy's guests and their children. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.